Welcome to our special Substack Live tonight, because there is a lot going on in the authoritarian realm of where the United States is going right now. I'm here with Olga Lautman. Typically, you see us on Thursdays at 11 o'clock Eastern, and we are so grateful to everybody from here in the United States and around the world who's joining us tonight on this special episode. Olga and I were talking about the fact that have a very unique perspective on what's happening here. I was born in the Soviet Union. Olga's family is from the Soviet Union. She's a Soviet slash Russian expert. I am too. And we see a lot of parallels between what's happening here in the United States and what we experienced ourselves in our own lives and what our families experienced growing up in an authoritarian regime. So we thought that we would be able to have a discussion with each other and also with yourselves, with all of you here about those parallels and what's happening. So hey Olga, happy Tuesday night. How are you?
Right, we're free, so that's a good thing.
For now,
um
for now.
exactly for now. um yeah since the 2016 election, I've been sounding the alarm about this because Trump, has the same tactics that that is used in Russia, and he attempted to do it during his first term, and luckily there were some guardrails. But I mean, the parallels are incredible between what Putin did. And it's not only Putin. When people think of Russia, they think, Putin created the system. And I always say he is a symptom of the system. The system is so cruel and corrupt for centuries that, I mean, it created the likes of Stalin and Brezhnev and Putin. And the tactics, really, I mean, I remember looking into um hey, called the SARS and their special services. I couldn't believe that how advanced their special services were in, specifically monitoring dissidents and any kind of criticism of the
Yes,
Tsar.
they were called the Akhrana,
Afghana
which means
Guardian.
guardians. But they were
Hmm.
guardians of a certain dogma. So just to be clear as to
Yeah.
who the Akhrana was, but yes.
Of hell. And
Yeah.
so advanced for, I mean, the 1800s, they had a very advanced surveillance system. And then obviously we saw what happened through the 1900s. And that's why I'm so happy that you're here with me, because
Yeah.
you know the Soviet Union, Russia, and I mean, what we're seeing here is basically the same playbook. And I think it's very important for people to understand, not only what is happening, but what is coming and what we have to do to push back.
Yeah, and I just, you and I kind of provide this caveat every so often on our Thursday show. But before we really get going, because I think a lot of what we're going to discuss is scary. And I think people might think we're kind of exaggerating, but the reality, and I just want people to know, it's not that Olga and I, we say this all the time, we don't have any kind of special intelligence or any kind of special insight into something that's not out there. What we do have is a very keen sense of figuring out what has been reported. Importantly, what has not been really that reported, but what we have seen out there in the ecosystem that's public, and how that all aligns with what's happening. Um, for the life of me, we talk about this all the time. I don't know why the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and others are not blowing out the front pages of every single paper every single day to connect these dots. Because in isolation, whether it's Trump defying a court, we'll get to all of these, but whether it's Trump defying a court order to allow the Associated Press to join in White House briefings because they have not acquiesced to his demand that the Gulf of Mexico be called the Gulf of America. He has banned them from the White House. Now, that sounds kind of foolish, right? Ultimately, it's like, well, it's kind of stupid. It's semantics. It's over a name. Who really cares what you call it? But the reality is, a lot of news organizations have either started calling it the Gulf of America or just now call it the Gulf or just call it the body of water and off the west coast of Florida because they're afraid. And that's something that is how things begin. And we'll get to that in a second. Whether it is refusing to return this El Salvadorian migrant back to the United States, despite a Supreme Court order saying that they have to do everything possible to do that. Um, all of these things in isolation are outrageous. All of these things put together in total spell something much more sinister, which is a bent towards authoritarianism and, frankly, the middle finger to the rule of law that has kept this country in good stead for most of its 249 years. So, Olga, I want to start because you had a great rundown. I said, "What are we talking about and how we're going to talk about it?" You said a wonderful rundown. No notes from me on it. And you said really the first thing that authoritarians do. It's the first thing Putin did. It's the first thing Hitler did. It's the first thing Mao Zedong did. I don't know much about Pol Pot, but I assume it's the first thing he did. It's certainly the first thing that Orban is doing in Hungary. And it's time and again, the first thing authoritarians do is that they get rid of the government worker class, what Trump calls the deep state, which the rest of us would call nonpartisan experts,
Yeah,
and
workers.
yeah, and install loyalists, right? Who are unqualified.
Yep. So, I mean, again, the Soviet Union ran this way. Trump attempted to do it the first time around, except that he couldn't find himself like a hard enough group of loyalists at the time, and he wasn't really unfamiliar with government. He didn't fully capture the Republican Party in 2017. So, I
And
mean, it
didn't, and
was,
importantly, sorry to interrupt, importantly, did not plan for this because he never planned to win. I mean, by his own admission, they were all shocked that he won the election.
yeah.
So he didn't line up the transition the way he wanted to put these people all in place.
Yep. And he also, I mean, he did put loyalists, but these loyalists ultimately had loyalties to the Constitution. So, as vile as they are, I mean, these days it's incredible, and please forgive me, but I'm cheering John Bolton every time he's on CNN, sounding warning and
Mm,
screaming of what
yeah.
is happening to us. And I mean, these were the loyalists that Trump thought were going to be loyal to him, who chose to be loyal to the United States. And who are now on his, enemies list.
Mm,
So this is what he attempted to do and what Putin did. Putin, the first thing he did was round up his criminal thugs from, St. Petersburg when he was a deputy mayor. And basically, you know this, they had the dachas. And basically, it's a who's who who was in his group. And despite their criminal backgrounds, despite them having zero expertise in government or the agencies that they were going to lead, he installed them into key positions. I mean, this was the first thing from the minute he walked in. He made sure to put all his loyalists that he knew over a decade, that they all knew each other, they knew each other's, dark past. Obviously, you want criminals as loyalists so you could dangle it over their head in order in case they decide to step out of line. And this is what he did, put a bunch of unqualified people to run every single agency in Russia and every state company in Russia. We are seeing this here. I mean, every single one of Trump's picks are either a rapist accused of rape or have never served in the government or podcast, extremist podcasters. I mean, you and the experienced people are being fired at the top levels. I mean, you saw from February, the minute he walked in, I mean, the purges started immediately. He did not wait. And
mm,
on top of it, we'll get to it later, you had Elon Musk basically directing to make sure that all the top people are swiftly walked out of government in order to collapse the institutions and make them, loyal to Trump. And this was the first, alarm bell, something he couldn't achieve in 2017, and again, we had a few close calls. I don't know if people remember the acting what was he, Attorney General, I believe, Whitaker. And there were a few, incompetent and kind of vile people that he put in, and he always put them in as acting because he knew they wouldn't be able to get confirmed. But for the most part, at that point, which is a very key point. He did not have full control of the Republican Party. And just like in Russia, I've been calling, I'm not kidding, since like 2019, the Republican Party, the United Russia Party. Um, he now has full control. They will do everything and anything he says. And Congress basically is Russia's state Duma, which, is a rubber stamp. Whatever Trump says,
Yeah,
dictates, they just carry out his orders.
it's very interesting because I believe it was tonight, maybe it was yesterday. Chuck Grassley, who is the senator pro tempore, fourth in line actually, I apologize, third in line to the presidency by virtue of
Really?
being the senior Republican in the Senate. Chuck Grassley, I believe, is in his 90s. Chuck Grassley has been a senator for a very long time. So much so that when I worked in the Senate, I spent 9/11 with Chuck Grassley. Um, we were evacuated together. We spent many hours together, among other senators. So, and that was 2001. So, just goes to show how long. And he'd been there for a while, even back then. Had a town hall. I'm not sure if you're aware of this in Iowa, which has used to be a swing state, is now basically a reliably red state, where he was shouted down. And this is Chuck Grassley, who's kind of, really an establishment figure in Iowa, shouted down by his own constituents over the fact that he would not force Trump as a member of Congress to return this El Salvadorian migrant, Abrego Garcia, to the United States, who just for people to understand, we talked about this before on Thursday. He is in what the Russians would call a gulag, except I think gulag is actually a nice term for where he is. He is in CCOT, which is a terrorism prison, maximum security, 23 and a half hours a day in your cell. Half an hour, the remaining half an hour, you get to walk outside, not outside, excuse me, you get to walk in the hallway either for exercise. I'm not sure what kind of exercise you could do in the hallway or for Bible study. If you are in solitary confinement, which my understanding is it's not that hard to get solitary for whatever reason, they might look at a guard wrong, up to 15 days, 2 stories below ground in pitch black darkness, except there is a little tiny hole they drill 2 stories up where one ray of light can come through, but obviously only if it's light. Otherwise, you're in pitch black darkness. That is where this man has been sent. And the Supreme Court, and to their credit, unanimously said the government should do everything they can to return him, returned it down to a federal judge. The federal judge said the government has to do everything in its power to bring him back. The federal government at first, which acknowledged that he was sent there incorrectly, that they did not intend to send him there, now are saying he was a member of MS-13 and that's why he was rendered back to El Salvador. There is no evidence for him to be accused of being an MS-13 member, except that when he was arrested once for being an undocumented immigrant, a local cop in Maryland said that he might be an MS-13 member. That local cop was effectively bounced out of that department for giving a stripper um, information in exchange for sexual favors. So this
And
is whose
don't
word.
forget
This is
the
whose
Chicago
word we're
Bulls
right. Like no,
hat.
no due process, nothing. Obviously, if he were a member of
Nothing.
MS-13, he would not have been living freely as he was in Maryland all these years. So the whole thing is nonsense. But Chuck Grassley said, and this is again, I want to say I've actually worked with Chuck Grassley in legislation. As much as I'm a Democrat, I have a nonprofit that I run, and one of those, and obviously the nonprofit does a lot of bipartisan work. Chuck Grassley worked pretty closely with us on a particular piece of legislation. Chuck Grassley is a very smart man. I may not agree with him on a lot, but he's not a dummy. And yet here's Chuck Grassley, who as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, really guards his prerogative as a United States Senator very jealously, as he should, right? As he should, saying, I can't do anything about this. The Senate has no control over this. And then he got booed by people. And he said, well, um, the United States has no authority to bring him back. Only El Salvador has the authority to send him back. He got booed by people. I mean, the reality is that for Chuck Grassley to jump through these hoops is just astounding to me, Olga, because he knows better. And yet, as you said, Trump has so effectively taken over the Republican Party, and Chuck Grassley is planning on running again next year. So at the age of, I believe, 92. So Chuck Grassley can't afford to cross
Some
Donald Trump.
some of these Congress people have been in power longer than they've been alive.
Yeah, but
And
I mean, what
that's
does that
that's
say? At some point, if you're Chuck Grassley, and I say this with all due respect, but if you're Senator Grassley and you have served your country as he believes as he has, for decades, isn't now the time to say, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing because morally I can't not do the right thing. And if it costs me my reelection in the age of 92 or however old Chuck Grassley is, so be it. I mean, so be it. Really? Like, do you
I
really have
mean,
to abjure every single thing that you stand for so you can run for reelection one more time?
how many people, sacrifice their lives to defend our democracy? And, the people here who are now, tasked with defending democracy are looking the other way, are walking through, you know, these
Yeah.
situations where they're like, well, we can't do anything. I don't know. Well, and walking around something that is extremely obvious. And it's, I mean, honestly, it's sickening because this is exactly what happened with the United Russia Party.
Uh,
I mean, the Putin's party, Putin today can have every single one of his party members, you know, parrot them out and say, take for instance Prigozhin, the Wagner terrorist who
right.
was assassinated allegedly, that he, is a terrorist, and then tomorrow Putin changes his mind, and the same, group of prostitutes, I call them, will come out and say, "Oh no, Prigozhin's good. He's very good. He's, loyal to the country and whatever." So basically, it's like they have no thought whatsoever. They repeat what the Kremlin tells them to repeat, do what the Kremlin tells them to do. And this is effectively what the Republican Party has become. You see absolutely zero pushback, even when you know it's unconstitutional. They know that running a third term, for a third term is unconstitutional. Yet, not one of them can say this. They will go on TV and say, well, and a few of them actually in the House are putting through a bill to try to allow Trump to run a third term. They know it's unconstitutional,
Yeah.
but
And I
yet
think,
they just are fully captured and they will refuse to say the most basic principles of the Constitution. They refuse to defend them.
yeah, I want to talk about Lindsey Graham as another very good example of that because it has something to do with Russia, right? So people may or may not be aware. I assume if you watch the show, you probably are aware that the Russians massacred, and I mean massacred in cold blood, um, children and other civilians in Suma, which is a region of Ukraine, on Palm Sunday. Not an accident that it was on Palm
No.
Sunday. That was a start of Holy Week for the Russian Orthodox Church as well. And it was and it was also giving the middle finger to Trump, right? Who keeps talking about how he wants Russia to come to terms and yada yada. It was basically Putin saying, "I'm going to do whatever I want, and you, Donald Trump, are going to jump when I say jump." And that's in fact what's happening. If you saw what happened with Steve Witkoff today, we don't need to dwell on
And
it. We could, yeah. I do want to
And
talk about
just
this.
to
Yeah,
add one thing, this Palm Sunday attack came after last weekend that Russia bombed the playground, killing children.
yes, and that was in
So
Kryvyi Rih,
that was last Sunday.
right?
So
Kryvyi
you
Rih.
Saturday, and then you have this Palm Sunday attack
Yeah.
the next week.
So that attack was the Kryvyi Rih attack, and I'm sorry to the Ukrainians who might be watching. I'm pronouncing it with a Russian accent, so no, no offense given. I just don't speak Ukrainian, but they did that town is Zelensky's hometown, so that was a signal too. That wasn't an accident. That city.
No, none
That
of
was
them
that was
are accidents.
so. But you know it's almost what's happening in this country is so insane. And again, I don't know that people are connecting these dots. I should have a column coming out on this tomorrow. But you have Lindsey Graham, who is, of course, one of Donald Trump's biggest enablers in the Senate. Um, tweeting out shortly after Trump tweeted out that how dare 60 Minutes and CBS can't be shut down fast enough because they presumably because they aired an interview with Zelensky yesterday, or excuse me, Sunday, where Zelensky said innocuously that Russian propaganda has gotten so awful in the United States that even some politicians are parroting Russian propaganda. Of course, they all took that personally to mean that he was attacking Trump. Whether he was or he wasn't, I don't know. But the fact that they're taking it so personally means that, of course, everybody knows that Trump is the one who's parroting Russian propaganda, as is JD Vance. And you had I mean, it's just so incredible. You had um, Lindsey Graham basically accusing 60 Minutes of running this hit piece on Trump, even though the hit piece was not on Trump. The hit piece was Zelensky talking about Russian propaganda infiltrating the United States. And then about 2 seconds later, I believe it was yesterday morning, Monday morning, like not even Friday, Sunday night, saying we can't make peace with Putin. This attack on civilians means that Russia, there's no making peace with Russia. We got to stand up to Putin. We got to get rid of Putin. Well, and crucially, I think that a tweet ended with, and anybody who enables Putin's got to go. Well, Senator, with all due respect, the biggest enabler who's enabling Putin is you, because you are enabling the guy down Pennsylvania Avenue, sitting at the corner of 16th and Pennsylvania Avenue, who is in the White House, who is giving Vladimir Putin everything that Putin could have ever hoped for and more. So if you want to get
And
rid of
more.
people who are enabling Putin, look in the mirror, sir, and then take a ride down Pennsylvania Avenue and talk to your friend, the president, who you also, in your pinned tweet, boasted about being not just a great political leader, but also your very good friend who you've never beaten at golf in your golfing buddies. Right? Like maybe
Crazy.
while you're on the golf course, sir, maybe you should talk to him because that's what's happening. And I think that is the disconnect, Olga, that you're talking about with United Russia, where you have these politicians in Russia who incrementally, knowing who Putin was, fallen
Absolutely.
so insanely in line with him that anything goes, that they're now calling the Jewish president of Ukraine a Nazi.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they're under full control. And as is, which we'll get to, the media and frankly everything, and everything
Yeah.
runs, it's a well-oiled propaganda machine. Occasionally there are breaks, but for the most part it's a well-oiled propaganda machine. So
Yeah.
we talked about the first two similarities,
Yeah.
the capture of the party and the installing of loyalists. The other thing is the purging of federal workers and dismantling of agencies and the chaos. I call it strategic
Yeah.
chaos because there's just so much chaos that people think Trump is crazy. He's not crazy. This is all strategy to keep media occupied, running, chasing, stories to keep inside the federal government. Everybody, instead of monitoring for threats to the United States coming from inside, they're too busy worrying about whether they'll have a job, checking emails, whether they have to fill out a questionnaire of the 5 things they did to an unelected billionaire. Um, and basically creating this and dismantling agencies. This is all by design. When Putin came in, he installed his loyalists. Immediately, they started pushing out any of the Yeltsin leftovers, any of the, previous people who might stand in the way or report on anything of him taking full power. And this is what we're seeing here. So that's another tactic that is so, similar, seeing the chaos caused within the federal government and the agencies that are meant to protect us. And the fact that these agencies are being dismantled, task force are being shut down, federal workers, like I said, are preoccupied whether they will have a job today. You're fired tomorrow. Come back after tomorrow. You're fired again. And this chaos, while this is all happening, there's something even more sinister happening behind the scenes. And one is that, as you weaken democratic agencies, you cause an automatic, it's easier for an authoritarian to take over because weaken democratic institutions and federal agencies, with loyalists there who will do whatever Trump says. Um, that allows Trump to have a quicker power grab. So this is one of the tactics that I've also picked up. And then on top of it, I want to get to two things. One, I'll talk about my surveillance article. Two, I want to
Yeah.
talk about your Gulag article because now it should be, I mean, really, you should be talking about your Gulag article every day, or at least every time Trump threatens to send
Yeah.
US citizens. So with this chaos within agencies, and again, I have no evidence. This is just me putting my analyst hat on and putting the pieces together. While these federal agencies are being collapsed and the workers purged, Musk has sent his operatives inside these agencies. And I actually wrote an article today. Took me a while to figure out how to put it together without sounding too crazy. But what it looks like is that they are putting together a surveillance system, a centralized surveillance system, like what happened in Russia, where, I mean, literally, if you tap on a keyboard from your home and say the wrong, type the wrong thing or like the wrong post, you'll have federal security services showing up. I've been documenting, all their actions, and while all this chaos is happening, and HHS is collapsing, and this is collapsing, and these people are being purged, Musk and his operatives and Peter Theos Palantir are going in, gaining access to IRS databases, to Social Security databases, to national what is it, labor board relations
NLRB, yeah,
databases.
National Labor Relations Board. Yep.
Yeah, all the databases. Now, these databases alone are powerful enough. Imagine if they take me, for instance, as an example, please don't, but if they do, and say, we want to know everything on Olga, and then they have access and have copied all these databases across different federal systems, and they fuse them into one. And they have an AI, basically system that is generating personal dossiers. So they know everything about you from the minute you were born or the minute you entered the country, everything, your financials, where you work, how long do you keep jobs for? Are you one of those who stays, at a job a long time? Are you one who floats between jobs? Have you had unemployment history? Did it, oh, look, it looks like when she was, this happened, she happened to get divorced, and kind of they could put together a full dossier on you that could be weaponized. And this is my biggest fear, that I think that Doge was not, they sold it to us as efficiency and basically finding fraud and waste and whatever. I worry that it was actually put into place with that being sold to the American people. But its actual task was to create a centralized surveillance system, like in Russia, like in China, where, once they fully grab power, Trump can basically use it to create target list, which is something very familiar in Russia. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, listen, I don't think you sound crazy. I think that anybody who thinks that this is crazy has never lived in a surveillance state the way that
I mean,
some of
in
us
Russia,
have.
you can make a phone call. And if you even speak to someone in Russia from here, and you could be talking about the weather or the flowers, the minute you mention something political, you actually hear a click on the line because they're listening.
Yeah, and that this is what I said at the start that I want people to understand. This is not some extreme fantasy land that we're talking about here. It is happening. It is happening in places like Russia. And Trump, I've said this before, we've said this on our show before. eh, this is not somebody who's kind of like surreptitious. He's not Putin in the sense that he does stuff quietly. He announces what
No.
he's going to do. When he said that he was going to be a dictator on day one, that was not a rhetorical device because he's not somebody who has I don't know if it's a neurological like he's actually quite honest, Trump.
He's a narcissist. He's proud
Yeah,
of
and
what he's
so
saying
yeah,
and what he wants to accomplish in his,
so
you know,
so this is exactly and listen, when Elon Musk came into the United States government to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, you're telling me that you think Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who has a lot of other stuff to worry about, is going to take up his time to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, which he has not cut, which he hasn't even remotely tried to pretend that he's going to cut to the extent that he promised he would. Why do you think he's really there? And after you think about it that way, does what Olga said not make the most sense to you?
I knew it was cover for something, and just seeing all the patterns, that are happening, and the fact that, you want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, and the first thing you want is to access it started with Treasury. Um, Americans, personal information. Like,
It's data. Somebody just said
what
this in
does
the
that have
chat.
to do with waste, fraud, and abuse? You want to
Yeah.
find it, go to the Pentagon. You could start there. That's where the waste,
Listen,
fraud,
if
and abuse is.
yes, and you're not going to cut the federal government by the trillions that he promised he was going to cut it by
Yeah.
without cutting the Pentagon. They're not doing that. Without eradicating entitlement programs, we'll see about that. But that certainly has something Elon Musk is doing. Um, look,
And I think his, Doge list, the cuts that he was reporting, I think those were shiny objects to keep journalists occupied, instead of trying, reporting on what actually is happening. And the only one who's not running after these shiny objects was Wired. Wired, the, media
yeah,
outlet, have been busy talking about the mechanics behind the scenes, not, oh, he reported 8 billion, whatever, 80 billion. It's actually 8 million, whatever that thing is. So I think those are, and that's why they keep changing, and why he keeps putting new figures out, is to keep journalists busy, trying to see what this cut and abuse is, and to have the media repeating this is all about waste, cut, and abuse and efficiency. I mean, this is an unauthorized agency. I have read the profiles of some of Musk operatives. They have worked with criminal hackers. They have one has a server, had
yeah.
companies on a server in Russia. He actually is part Russian. You have another one who's Serbian, which is, falls under, how you call it, Vucic falls under Putin's control. I mean, you have extremely shady people that we don't even know. I mean, thanks to Wired and a few courageous media outlets, not New York Times, Wired, who actually went and found out who these people are and tried to stitch together their backgrounds. The backgrounds are problematic. I mean, one deals with, was posting and dealing with Nazi forums. I mean, these are the people who are stealing our data. And, and the media is treating it as if it's a legitimate, authorized, congressionally approved agency, and the tactics they're using. I mean, I think Rachel Maddow is the only one who actually sounded the alarm that they're using U.S. Marshals to kick down doors into independent agencies. So they're using
Yeah.
violence and force to get into. Like, why does an unauthorized agency with unvetted, unknown hackers have, the services of the U.S. Marshals to go into independent agencies? So I think
Well,
this is all for, keeping the media busy. And what I worry is that they're really building a surveillance state. That's like
yes,
the
and I
only,
think what is interesting, to go back to the topic we discussed right before that, is we're talking about these El Salvadorian prisons, and we're talking about the
yes,
deportation of these undocumented immigrants. I don't believe that Donald Trump really cares about these undocumented immigrants, other than as a
no,
plot device to eventually get his political enemies sent to the same prisons, which he talked about yesterday on a hot mic, saying, homegrown, homegrown who? Homegrown
yeah,
people who he said
violent.
are
What's violent?
violent repeat criminals. Well, A violent repeat criminal would be, in his mind, potentially somebody who protests outside a Tesla dealership every weekend. He's a repeat person. Trump could be the one to decide who's a criminal or not. There's no due process left. If we have no due process for these people who are being arrested at airports now, some of whom are green card holders or student visa holders who are here absolutely legally, what's to say that we're not going to do that to American citizens? And he basically has said he will. So again, you have to believe him when he says it. You have to believe when he says it. And to the credit of the Iowans who are protesting people like Senator Grassley, is that as much as they may care about this Salvadorian migrant who's down there, I think they understand that this is not just about him,
It's
and
coming for everyone.
it's coming for everybody. And then I want you to talk about Eric Prince, our old friend Eric Prince, who, going back to the Iraq War, has been among the shadiest people in the
He's a
world. Whose
criminal.
whose
He should
sister,
be in El Salvador prison. That's
yeah,
the one who should be there
whose sister
for
Betsy
his war
DeVos,
crimes.
yeah, whose sister Betsy DeVos was the education secretary of education in the first Trump administration. But talk about Eric Prince, because why don't you give people a little bit of a 5 second primer on Eric Prince's background, and then talk about what his roles in all of this? Because if just people know, if you hear the name Eric Prince, pay attention and get scared, because this guy's never been on the right side of anything, including hanging out in the Seychelles with a bunch of. But why don't you tell the story?
Right before I get into that, you mentioned, targeting of immigrants and international students. Um, I agree 200%. They are a test case. They're basically working out the kinks, and they're also running surveillance on them and on federal workers. I mean, there are countless articles, and I cited, in the article I wrote, that basically say federal workers know they're being monitored, that their keyboards are being monitored, that their phone conversations are being monitored, and basically they're being monitored because they're looking Musk and is looking for disloyalty to Trump within that, which means loyalty to the Constitution. But get to that, these people are test cases, and we saw this with Russia. I mean, when Putin came into power, he came into power. Why did he come into power? Because him and Patrushev, who at the time was head of FSB, blew up apartment buildings. They caused terrorist attacks to kill Russians, to elevate Putin, to create an enemy, with the Chechens, to start the second Chechen war. Putin obviously, had something to talk about because, I mean, frankly, anyone who saw Putin in the 90s, he was as dull as watching paint dry on a wall. But here he had, something like, we are going to protect our citizens and we're going to go after the Chechen terrorists who blew up our citizens. I believe it was like 318 Russians that died, and it ended up being going back to the security services of Russia who organized it. And at the time, it was Patrushev in charge of FSB. Um, so you have this, marginalizing attack on marginalized communities, and this is the same thing that is happening here. And because if you do it to these people, the hopes of dictators is that most people say, well, it's not happening to us, it's happening to them. Oh, this is happening to, pro-Palestinian protesters. This is happening to immigrants, but this is how it starts. And then eventually it's everyone. Now, to go back to the gulag, I suggest everyone read your article, and we'll do show notes and include your
Mm.
article in it. Because you very quickly picked up on how these gulags are going to be used for us. How, Trump is basically bypassing due process, the courts, ignoring the Supreme Court, to send people here. Now, recently it was reported that Eric Prince, who ran mercenary groups, he's like, for anyone who knows Prigozhin and his Wagner terrorist, basically he's the American equivalent of that. I mean, he committed atrocities across, the world
Africa.
with his
Mm.
mercenary groups. And I mean, he frankly is a very scary individual. He actually worked with Prigozhin too. Um, he apparently has pitched a plan to Trump, and this is why I think Trump has been repeating this so often the past few days about deporting American citizens. he pitched a plan to basically make part of the Gulag in El Salvador American territory. So now, can you imagine? And this can easily be done. I remember I went to Aruba, and one minute I'm in Aruba, the minute I step into the airport, I'm suddenly in American territory. That's it. So here, can you imagine if they take a part of the prison and turn it into American territory, designated this is American territory? That means they can pull disappear anyone, American, not American, bypassing the courts and send them there. And now you're not sending it to a foreign gulag, you're sending it to a U.S. gulag on foreign territory. And this is a very scary, and I think this is why Trump is saying we're looking around of ways to go around, and see if this is legal or not. Because if they designate part of this prison, this gulag, this hellhole torture chamber, as American territory, I mean, this is going to be extremely dangerous. And again, this is
Well,
one of the
it's what they did with Guantanamo, um, and on Cubans. I mean that has been American base for decades, but it's on Cuban soil. The problem is that if it's American territory, it's going to have to be subjected to American law, and prisoners have constitutional rights in this country, including rights of due process, rights to their attorney, rights to visit their families. Um, it happens. This prison in El Salvador, you are never allowed to have visits from your friends and family or have any contact with them. There's limited access to attorneys. You certainly have no, cruel and unusual punishment prohibitions as you would in American prisons, as much as I think they kind of violate those in American prisons as well.
Mhm.
But the part that is scary about this is that these people were disappeared to these prisons, and the only way that their loved ones were able to find out whether they were there or dead on the side of a road or in a ditch somewhere was because they happened to see footage of them and they were able to recognize their tattoos or some other,
Yeah, the
thing.
propaganda videos they
Right,
were putting out.
right. Um, you know, uh, if the president decides that you are a violent repeat criminal, which is what he's classifying these homegrown Americans that he wants to send down there is. First of all, even the worst, I mean, I don't care if you're the Unabomber. I don't care if you're Jeffrey Dahmer. Those people had due process before they were put in, the Unabomber lived in Supermax in Florence, Colorado for decades. But before he got to Supermax, he was subjected to all the due process in the world. He went before a judge, all of it, right? He was able to plead guilty or he was able to have a trial. I can't remember what happened, but the reality is he was subjected to American law and he was given the due process that every American, and not just Americans, anybody in American soil deserves. Um, the president of the United States can no more say that, hey, Olga or Julie, you two are violent repeat criminals, so we're going to send you to CCOT and good luck to your family figuring out where you went. um, then anybody can. I mean, he can't do that. But yet, that is in fact what he wants to do.
Yep.
He's been very
Yep.
clear about it. And I will say this, and I said this today I did an interview with a radio host today, and I actually told the story. My grandfather, my great grandfather, was one of the early Bolsheviks, and he was an early Bolshevik because he was a Jewish, a Jewish man, and he thought, as a lot of Jews did, that the czars were awful to the Jews, which they were, and that the communists were going to usher in a whole different utopia for Russian Jews, and that really you had a lot of Jews who believed that. I don't know much about him, so I don't know what else he felt. For all I know, he was a true believer in the Russian Revolution. My understanding is he was. He was very close to Trotsky, who was an awful human being. But for whatever reason, they were very close. In the 1920s and the early 1930s, after Lenin died, and he was also apparently close to Lenin, after Vladimir Lenin died, um, Trotsky and Stalin had a power struggle. Stalin won that power struggle. And my great grandfather, much like a lot of people close to Trotsky, was rounded up. He was given a heads up by somebody that they were coming for him. So he did the right thing, which is he was so worried that his entire family would be rounded up that he actually left in the dead of night and went east into the Asian part of the Soviet Union, basically to get away from his family so that they wouldn't be caught up in this. At which point, the Soviet authorities caught up with him there and executed him. And my grandmother, his daughter, who I was very close to, did not actually know what happened to him until I would say the mid 80s when she was able to finally get access to these documents. That was 50 years later. I tell that story so that people understand that the revolution doesn't just start with political opponents. Eventually, it eats its own. It happened in the French Revolution when, I don't want to go too much into this, but you had the Jacobins. They eventually, like Robespierre and all those people, they were eventually guillotined themselves. The people who guillotined in the terror of 1793 then themselves were guillotined. It happened in Mao's revolution. It happened in the Soviet, revolution plus the next 20, 30, 40 years. You're never safe. You're
No.
never safe. So if you are a MAGA person and you're watching us, or just a Trump voter who's watching us, and you think that this is, I'm gonna own the libs, this is all Trump voting the libs, it's not going to stop with us. In fact, Trump is the kind of guy who needs to escalate because he needs drama. He's a narcissist. So it's never going to stop. Steve Bannon, as much as he's sitting here applauding this, they'll come for him. They'll come for Musk. Putin came for all the people who put him in office.
And for anyone who follows me, I always document Russia's the deaths in Russia. I mean, there are more people who worked, with Putin's adjacent companies, or
Yeah.
supporters of Putin, that fell out of windows, were poisoned. I mean, the amount of poisonings and the amount of people falling out of windows, and the creativity of these poisonings. I mean, poisoning, someone actually, sorry to laugh, he was, one of the oil execs, like high level. He was poisoned with toad poison. I mean, and they get you wherever you are. I mean, for anyone who knows Russia, I mean, it's not just in Russia they're killing people. It's in, across Europe. They will get you wherever you are. So again, these people, at one point, and just to touch on how true what you said is. So when Putin came back from Dresden, and before he became deputy mayor, he became very close with the mayor, the guy who would eventually become mayor, Sobchak. And he
Yeah.
was extremely close with him, and that was his mentor,
It was
and
actually not a
and he
bad
gave.
guy.
Yeah, he was okay. He was,
Yeah.
I mean, the Soviet Union just collapsed. I mean, again, they were all a little bit off, but the Soviet Union collapsed. He was the first, I guess, independent mayor,
Yeah.
non-communist in St. Petersburg. Took Putin underneath him as deputy mayor. By the way, Kalugin, who used to be head of counterintelligence, told me he's the one who put Putin into that position, because that just shows you that the KGB still didn't let
Yeah.
go of this, of surveillance even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Um, Anyway, so basically, for any normal person, Sobchak was Putin's mentor and did taught him everything, whatever. Um, then when Putin went to Moscow later, like when he was running for president, he invited Sobchak to basically campaign for him, and and whatever, invited him for dinner, sent him to campaign after the next day. Sobchak died of a heart attack. On his way, like in the campaign trail, he died of a heart attack, and his two bodyguards, if I remember correctly, died of a heart attack. This is Putin's mentor, who was most likely poisoned because he knew too much of
Yeah.
what happened, and he died, and his bodyguards died of a heart attack. And of course, then through the 2000s, you just saw everyone falling to death of heart attacks, except Putin has his inner circle. For the most part, he had stuck with them. The other thing I wanted to touch on, that what was it that you mentioned about it'll
Well,
come
I was
back to me.
basically saying that just what you said, which is that nobody's safe. I mean, nobody is safe, and this whole notion of we own the libs, we own the libs, and cry harder, and all this other nonsense that we constantly get on social media. Like, I'm actually not crying for myself. I'm fine. I don't need Social Security. I'm pretty far away from retirement, so my 401k I hope will eventually bounce back. I don't rely on government funding for anything. Um, I'm okay. The people who I'm sad for are the people who are buying into this nonsense and who don't understand. Like you and I think are kind of ready for what's coming because we know what's coming, and we
Yeah,
haven't been
I don't
wrong
think
yet.
anyone wants to live in our head because
Yeah, I
it's
mean, like
quite
truly, like no,
dark.
yes, nobody should be living in our head, but the reality is
Yeah.
because we know what's in our head that we know what's coming. The people I feel bad for are the ones who truly believe that it's not going to impact them. I mean, how many stories do you have to read in the paper every day about some Trump voter saying, "Oh my God, I didn't realize he was coming from my Social Security," because they can't get somebody to answer the phone in the Social Security office, so they can't sign up. And I didn't realize that he was gonna like come from my 401k. What is this? I didn't realize I'm gonna have to pay more for Christmas decorations this year because of China. Like
And
I,
these
I
are like
didn't
the
when
least
he
of
talked
the
about waste, fraud, and abuse. I didn't think he was coming for that stuff. Well,
yeah.
like I could have told you a year ago, as both of us basically said a year ago in our respective, newsletters, our respective social media. I mean, of course this was happening. In the same way that, of course, what we're saying right now is going to happen. And we know that because nothing new is under the sun. We happen to be Russia experts, but I also know quite a bit about history of other nations, not as well as I do Russia. And I can tell you this happens everywhere. And as I said, I hate to go back to the 18th century. This happened in the French Revolution. This is how old this stuff is. Consistently. This happened in the Roman Empire. I mean, look at the collapse of the Roman Republic to see who turned on whom. We're going back more than 2,000 years
And
here. I
even
mean,
the
this is human
targeting,
nature.
the target list. I mean, this was a Soviet practice, this was a Hitler practice. This, I mean, every dictator, you know, has some kind of surveillance system to create lists so they can go after
Of
people to
course, of
silence them.
course. And
And
and yeah, I mean, I want to talk briefly because he's going after everything, right? We just talked about due process, but the people who are supposed to ensure that there's due process, obviously the judges, but everybody needs a defense attorney. And here he is going after the law firms. Of course he is. Of course he is. He started with Paul Weiss, but he didn't end with Paul Weiss. Um, and most of them have caved. Big law has caved for the most part. And I have some very good friends who work at these very big law firms and they're beside themselves. And yet, some of them are partners and they say, well, what choice did we have? We would have lost all of our clients. And it's a question of
and
survival or not, which is what he's depending on because he himself is so motivated by greed that he understood that they are as well, that they would actually subvert all of their supposed ideals about due process and everything else to bend the knee because they're also motivated by greed. Very few, I'm not a big fan of Perkins Coie from what my nonprofit work. They're very bad on non-disclosure agreements, but I got to give Perkins Coie credit. One of the very few law firms that said no way.
so just to touch on the law firms, this is a very strategic attack because Trump promised retribution. He has said it for years. He attempted to do it the first time around. Didn't work out because again, there were some kind of guardrails. And now, for instance, say Trump has a list of 1,000 people he wants to go after, open criminal investigations against, which happens in Russia. I mean,
Yeah,
the reason that Putin is so and his predecessors are so successful are the fact that they have captured law. They control the Supreme Court, they control the judges, they control the Interior Ministry, which is equivalent to our Department of Justice. They control all the legal facets. So now, if Trump had the list of 1,000 people that he is planning to file prosecution charges against, and will force his Department of Justice that he has captured and weaponized to go after this. And we've already seen a sampling. We've seen, him saying Chris Krebs needs to be tried, and Miles Taylor for treason.
And
Um,
sorry to interrupt you, but I just want people to know who Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor are. Miles Taylor was a whistleblower in the first Trump administration. Effectively, was the guy who wrote, I don't know if people remember this, the anonymous column in the New York Times about how terrified people in the Trump administration were about his behavior. Um, Chris Krebs is the guy who said, no, actually, the 2020 election was not stolen,
Yeah, he
which
worked for
is which
cybersecurity, our cybersecurity agent to make sure that our elections are secure, and said
and
no.
and
Trump,
he Donald Trump said basically signed an executive order directing Pam Bondi, who was supposed to be the Attorney General of the United States, not his personal attorney, not even the White House counsel. She is the attorney. It's well, if she files a lawsuit, if the Justice Department files a lawsuit, the Justice Department, it would be the United States versus,
yes,
person X. It's not Donald Trump versus person X.
yes,
But he's basically directed her to investigate and I assume indict on trumped up charges, Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs for treason. Treason
yes.
for telling the truth.
And this, and I just remind me Antifa, because I want to get to that, to go back
Oh
to
yeah.
the previous. But this is the danger of this. I mean, again, it looks strategic. It looks like corruption. Of course, it's all of this, corruption and chaos of going after law firms. But this is very strategic because if Trump has, say, 1,000 people that he wants to prosecute, these people are going to need representation, and they're going to need
Yeah.
lawyers who, one, can access federal buildings, which every executive order basically bans, them from accessing federal buildings. Two, they need clearances, because a lot of the people that he wants to go after. Their lawyers are going to need to have top security clearances. So there's a very systematic thing of what is happening. Trump right now is basically taking the legs out of representation before he starts his retribution. Because then once he starts going after people and NGOs and Democratic, leaders, these people are not going to have anyone who will, one, be able to represent them, um, or want to represent them because they're seeing what is happening with the other law firms. And this is one of the, the things. The minute I saw him attacking the law firms and the judges and the Supreme Court, and then seeing the institutionalist, oh, well, this is against the law. And I'm like, do they not realize dictators write their own laws? They don't need, I mean, Putin wasn't supposed to be in power. He, played around with the Constitution and made himself in power. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that's, that's something that I I get constantly frustrated by because people keep saying, well, we have the Constitution, we have the Constitution. Listen, the Constitution is a piece of paper. It is only as good as people abiding by the Constitution. And the separation of powers are only as good as the three branches of government asserting their independence. I think the framers never envisioned somebody like Trump because they never envisioned, I should say they probably envisioned somebody like Trump, but they never envisioned with something like this Congress,
Yeah.
which has given up.
They didn't think he would be able to capture,
Yeah,
two
I mean, I think
branches
they
come,
thought, okay, if you have like somebody who
not
wants to be a
Trump, but
monarch,
someone.
the
Hmm.
other branches will keep them in check. Well, the problem is the other branches are not keeping them in check. The courts are trying, but ultimately they don't have a standing army. They don't have the ability to defund anything. They're just, they are the least potent if somebody wants to disobey them. Congress technically has the power of the purse, although he's sequestering their money and has basically told them they don't have the power of the purse. But Congress isn't even trying. The courts are, I wouldn't say the Supreme Court is trying, but the lower courts are at least trying. I
But the
mean, they're doing
Supreme
their
Court,
best.
if they issue a ruling and Trump says, you know what, fuck you, what are they going to
Well,
do?
that's exactly what I mean. Listen, there are three things right now that are happening that are disparate, and I don't for the life of me understand again why this is not on the front page of the New York Times, what I'm about to say. First of all, you have a ban that
Yes,
Congress
Antifa.
passed.
I'll get to.
That right. You have a ban that Congress passed right before Joe Biden left, that was signed by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, that banned TikTok. Now, that ban said you could have a 90-day, the president may grant a 90-day extension of this ban
Hmm.
if ByteDance or whatever it's called that owns TikTok is working to sell TikTok to divest from TikTok. Fine. That 90-day extension was granted. It is now over. By law, listen, I don't care if you love TikTok or hate TikTok. I don't care if you agree with this law or you disagree with this law. The reality is, right now, TikTok needs to be banned in the United States because that is what the law of the land says. Donald Trump is ignoring that. He's now issued another extension. That's one. Two, a judge ruled that the Associated Press must be allowed back in the White House briefing room on Air Force One and should otherwise be given permission, not permission, should otherwise be able to cover the president. That has not happened. They are still banned.
Yep.
That's two. And the third, of course, is the judge said very clearly you have to do everything in your power to return Abrego Garcia back from um, uh, El Salvador, and they're basically saying no thanks. So each of those three things has been covered kind of in individual cases, but we are truly in a constitutional crisis right now. He is fully flouting the laws of the United States. And you may like it or you may hate, you may listen, you may be the biggest proponent of Donald Trump throwing out every undocumented immigrant out of this country. You may even be a proponent of him sending these immigrants to this gulag in El Salvador. But if you believe that he is not returning these people, or at least Abrego Garcia, back because you believe that Abrego Garcia should be there, you are picking and choosing which laws of the United States you want to follow. If you believe that the Gulf of Mexico should be called the Gulf of America because screw Mexico and we're America, goddammit, that's your prerogative. And if you believe the Associated Press should refer to it as the Gulf of America, that's also your prerogative. But a judge ordered the Associated Press to be allowed back in, and Trump said no. You may love TikTok and you may be on TikTok 24/7. It may be your favorite thing in the world, and you're devastated and heartbroken that you can't get a new iPhone because TikTok won't be able to be loaded on it anymore. And that sucks for you, and I'm sorry. But that's the law, and Trump is flouting it. And I would just say that one day, in the reverse, there may be another dictator who may be doing stuff that you really hate, that you don't agree with. And if a judge tells him not to do it and he does it anyway, you're going to be in a world of pain.
And
That's
to
all there
add
is
to
to it,
that,
which brings me to Harvard and to Columbia and to what he's doing to universities because it's the same thing, right? You may love the fact that he's sticking it to Harvard because Harvard are these pointy head, egghead elitists who, look down on you and you think they suck and you think it's, the People's Republic of Cambridge. But one day it could be Liberty University or Bob Jones. But why don't we talk about Harvard for a second? Why don't we talk about what he's doing to the Ivies, and not just to the Ivies, what he's
yeah.
doing to Northwestern
And,
and other
and
countries
to
and
add to
other.
that, once our rule of law collapses, our economy is going to go right with it. Because the only reason that we have had a strong, successful economy is because people choose to, keep their assets and invest in America because of the rule of law, because they know that we've always had stability and that the leader cannot just, say, oh, like a banana republic, like now what's happening in Russia. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you every day they're, nationalizing more companies, taking it away from private people and nationalizing criminalizing it or finding a criminal, offense from 1990s and then jailing the person and seizing their assets. I mean, there's a very clear correlation between a strong rule of law and a strong economy because once that goes, it will go. And I wanted to mention Antifa and go back to the gulags, because Trump has, like you said, that I mean, it's basically who he considers a repeat criminal. And I want people to remember during his first term, particularly during George Floyd, how he wanted to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. And I guarantee you, this is not far, away from what will happen this time around. That time he wasn't able to. He also wanted to shoot protesters, use the military. He was
Mhm.
held back. Um, but the thing is that once he designates Antifa as a terrorist organization, all of us are going to be violent criminals. All of us are going to be terrorists because, as far as Trump is concerned, from his own, things that he has said, Adam Schiff is Antifa. Anyone who is, a liberal is Antifa. And this is where we enter extremely dangerous territory of, where a dictator designates what the law is, who is violent, and then uses the state powers to silence these people. And before you cut in, I just want to give one example. In, I believe, 2017, there were protests in Russia against Putin, and the movement was gaining and whatnot. And basically, Putin started charging people for protesting with terrorism. He designated these people as terrorists, and they face terrorism charges for stepping out in the street. And this is one thing that can happen here because today they're testing it on MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. Tomorrow it's going to be Antifa and other groups, and then go and, explain with no due process what Antifa is, who is Antifa, who qualifies as Antifa, because I frankly don't even know what Antifa
Well,
is.
I'll tell you, that's where I wanted to jump in. So
Go ahead.
I was at Fox News during the creation of Antifa. So that is a total Fox construct. He got that from Fox. And when I was at Fox and they kept talking about Antifa, and if I had $1 for every segment I did on Antifa, I would be a really, really, really wealthy person right now. Um, I kept saying, I am a Democrat. I have been in Democratic politics for decades. Who the hell is Antifa? Who is it? I think there were a group of people who, a small, tiny, minuscule group of people that termed the coin, the phrase Antifa and said that we're Antifa, we're anti. By the way, Antifa, anti-fascist.
Yeah.
So we're not, God forbid somebody's anti-fascist. But it blew up into this incredible Fox manufactured bullshit thing that just I'm telling you does not exist. I mean, I was present at the creation. It's sort of similar to those migrant caravans that every time there's an election, Fox would start running these videos of the caravans are coming, these migrant caravans are coming. It was like people literally walking to the border. It wasn't like some horde. It was like literally like the Mongol hordes were coming to like rape and kill you in Texas. And the reality is like same thing, right? Complete plot device to get their audience engaged because if you're scared, you're not going to turn the channel. And if you think a bunch of Antifa terrorists are coming to burn down your small business and rape your wife and kids and foist black people on you or whatever they thought they were going to do to them, um, then you are not going to turn the channel because you're totally terrified. So Trump learned from that. I mean, he's no dummy, right? He knows a good plot device when he sees it. And so that's where Antifa came from.
Can you
That's what
imagine?
that's all about.
He's going to
I'm telling
label.
you, somebody who was literally
Can you
there. I mean,
imagine? He is going
producers
to
would laugh,
li-
but understand, because this is now national policy. Producers would laugh. The same anchors that were telling you Antifa is coming, as soon as we took the mics off during commercial break, we would look at each other and laugh, and they would roll their eyes
and
because they knew it
this
was complete nonsense. And now this is turning into something terrifying which is that you're absolutely right. All of us, yes, I am an anti fascist. So are you. I would venture to say
Absolutely.
probably everybody watching this show right now is anti
Yes,
fascist.
absolutely. And this is what a manufactured group is what Trump has called the terrorist organization, wanted to go after them during his first term. And I guarantee you, we're a few executive orders away when he focuses on domestic dissent, where Antifa will be designated. And then we can
Meanwhile,
all.
yeah, and meanwhile, to add to what you said, meanwhile, Kash Patel, the head of our FBI, has done multiple podcasts with a man who has talked publicly about finding the final solution to the American Jewish problem. So
And that takes us
who's
to universities.
and that takes us to universities. Go ahead.
Another tactic. So you know very well. In Russia, they basically the universities and frankly every school from kindergarten they start indoctrinating you, and every university and school is captured by the state. I mean, it's controlled by the state. They what curriculum is taught, what's allowed on the university, who gets admitted in, and that's it. And here you see a very systematic attack on universities. And it's not just Harvard, it's not just Columbia. I mean, you are seeing them systematically go after all universities. And you mentioned it a few weeks ago when we did our Thursday morning show. This is, I mean, extremely dangerous because Trump is doing it under the guise of anti Semitism. And of course, Jewish students need to be protected. Of course, you know, this should be something. Doesn't get pushed aside, even though Trump is using it as the guise for what he's doing. But at the same time, they're going to silence people who are speaking out. I mean, this right now, it's going after international students. Right now, you see the focus on this going after green card holders. There's a tracker that I looked at, and as of now, 1,100 students have lost their student visas, many of them not even notified, properly that they lost their visas. And you have, Trump, who is surrounded by white supremacists. So the fact that he is using anti-Semitism as cover to scrub social media, to see anyone who is making quote unquote, according to him, anti-Semitic claims, which, by the way, is not even about Jewish people. It could be about Netanyahu. Um, this is what they're doing. But again, I believe the international students are a test case because every single dictator knows that the power comes from the students. And usually you have universities who are the first to rise in any revolutions and any movements. And here, Trump is trying to silence these universities, and the demands he uh, bringing bringing into these universities goes beyond anti-Semitism. This is, going to what are you going to teach in your classrooms? You're not allowed to teach this. You're allowed to teach that. I mean, we have never had such federal overreach of the government going to universities to monitor what they're teaching, to demand list of their students, who's active, who's part of what club. I mean, this is obviously a test run for something more to come.
Well, it's a test. Listen, first of all,
And to hijack the university so they can
it's to
have.
hijack the universities. It is to destroy critical thinking because I believe that's what this is about. Critical thinking is the enemy of authoritarianism. It just is. And where do you learn critical thinking? At universities. Um, you don't obey. You're like college exists for you to test different hypotheses. It exists in some ways. The Socratic method in law schools and liberal arts schools exists for you to play devil's advocate. It exists for you to debate ideas. That is the finest element of a liberal education. By liberal, I don't mean liberal Politically liberal, I
Yeah.
mean, a liberal arts education. Um, Frankly, I studied international relations in the early 90s. All of my professors were former Reagan um, officials. They were all deeply conservative, at least when it came to foreign policy. And we don't really talk much about domestic policy except for abortion, but most of them were pretty Republican. They were Republicans from the Reagan administration. Um, I wasn't. And it's fascinating to the extent that everybody thinks universities are liberal. Actually, I was the liberal, but they were all conservative. I had the best, thank God for that. I mean, we had the best backs and forths, and they convinced me sometimes. I don't think I convinced them because I was young and stupid, and they were old and set in their ways or older. But the reality is, you sort of tested your propositions over and over again, and it kind of made you become a more critically thinking human being. That is not what he wants. That is not what he wants because listen, I am a Zionist. I will say that right now. Like I truly to me Zionism is, do you believe that the state of Israel should exist? The answer is yes, I do. Like that is not, to me, that is not a controversial decision. I don't care if Zionism has been perverted to me now, but that is what Zionism always has been. So I'm not somebody who's sitting there saying, but I will tell you that I firmly believe that within, not the way Columbia did it, they made their students feel incredibly unsafe. The way, they there really were Jewish students who were feeling unsafe, but short of the fact that they were feeling unsafe, if somebody at a university wants to debate me or debate anybody about why I'm wrong about Israel's right to exist, I am happy to have that debate. That is what universities are about. And this guy Khalil, who is now rotting away in a Louisiana prison for doing, I mean, for protesting about Israel's war in Gaza. I may agree with him, I may disagree with him. I actually disagree with him much more than I agree with him, but I will tell you right now, if he did something to make people feel unsafe, that is a crime, then the NYPD should prosecute him for it. But
And
short
that's
of that,
key. The NYPD or the
but
local
that's
police
yes,
department, not the federal
but not the
government. That
federal
is,
government. Otherwise, if he want, listen, I don't believe in shouting down people. If people, do it in a way where you have this debate in the confines of a classroom or in the confines or however else you want to do it. Don't shout people down and don't take over the campus to prevent people from going about their classes. But uh, you know, if anybody here thinks this is about anti-Semitism, my God, I'm Jewish, and I'm telling you right now, I'm deeply offended that he's exploiting Jews to do this. And anybody who's Jewish who thinks this is about anti-Semitism, let me tell you something. The first people they're going to come for is you. It always starts with the Jews. So, like the man who says that there were both people on good sides, both fine people on both sides of the Charlottesville debacle in 2018,
had dinner with Nick Fuentes.
has dinner with Nick Fuentes and Kanye West. That's not somebody who cares about Jews. Somebody who tells American Jews that they have dual loyalties is not somebody who cares about Jews. Somebody who lectures Chuck Schumer about being a bad Jew, or as I call it, voice planes to Chuck Schumer and to American Jews about being a good Jew, is not somebody who cares about Jews.
And the people in his administration, I mean, at the highest levels, are known anti
Christian
Semites. I
nationalist.
mean,
My God, Pete, listen, Pete
yeah.
Hegseth, I know him. Christian nationalist. If you have a Deus Volt tattoo, that is a tattoo that was worn by the Crusaders. And I said this on Piers Morgan's show a couple of months ago, and all these crazies came after me because apparently there's a huge apologetics, there's a huge pro Crusader element out there that's a MAGA that I did not realize existed until I had the nerve to talk about this. But I mean, these people are nuts. But if you think that somebody who has a Deus Volt tattoo, which is a Crusader tattoo and a Crusader cross, cares about the Jews, the same Crusaders trapped Jews in a synagogue in Jerusalem and burned them to death. Not to even talk about what they did to the Muslims. So let's be very clear, let's be very, very, very clear about what we're talking about here.
And that's the problem, that he is going after these universities. And again, I compare it to Russia, because in Russia,
Of course.
all the universities are owned by the state and dictated what they teach by the state. And basically, this is why, you have everything, people growing up and basically having no critical thinking, being indoctrinated, and now, over since the full scale invasion, I mean, Putin has really ramped up what is happening in universities, to the point that he has brought back patriot thinking, patriot classes, assembly of weapons and drones, forming the next generation of terrorists, basically, who will hate the West, who will hate, you know, all the countries that were captured by the Soviet Union, who see them either as non-existent and that they should be completely eliminated, or that they should be captured and live under Russian control. This is why it's so important here, because this is, whether Trump is saying it's against anti-Semitism, or this, again, DEI, which is another, smoke screen. I mean, the whole point is to get to these universities, and the whole point is to basically quash any kind of movement before it begins, by scaring the students and the faculty and the board members of these universities, that they won't allow any dissent when it turns to issues that may matter. Right now, it may be, pro-Palestinian protest. Tomorrow it could be protest for women's rights. So the point is to quash any kind of dissent before it begins. And we're seeing the systematic attack against all universities. I believe it's what, like 100 plus higher universities that have, and not only are we seeing a systematic attack, what's even more dangerous is the weaponization. Just like Trump is weaponizing federal agencies to go after media, to open investigations into media, he again ranted, like you said, about CBS. He ordered the FCC last month to open an investigation against CBS on a different matter. And basically, I believe there are now four media organizations that are under investigation. So Trump is weaponizing federal agencies to, try to silence the free press, to try to silence protest, and using it again, to threaten universities to pull their funding. Now he is ramping it up, that he'll strip them of their nonprofit status and force them to pay taxes. I mean, this is a complete assault on independent institutions that are supposed to be the pillars of any democratic society, using the federal government and using the Department of Justice, the FCC, and other agencies. And this is what is extremely worrying to me, because I mean, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and finally, you've got his spokeswoman, Carolyn Levitt, from the podium of the White House, who's effectively become a problem. It used to be. I mean, look, every press secretary is kind of a propagandist. That's the job of a White House press secretary, to put the best spin possible on administration policy.
This one is,
But this is like Baghdad Bob territory here. This
I
is
call
like,
her Peskova.
yeah,
Because
no,
she's
totally.
giving him, Putin's spokesperson, she's giving him run for his money.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
this is like I keep joking. Remember Baghdad Bob back in like Saddam Hussein, like as the American troops are approaching Baghdad, and you see the American planes, the F-16s flying overhead, and bombs going off, and he's saying, "No, no, there's nothing to see here. There's no invasion." Like this is Baghdad Bob. I mean, literally, this is like insanity,
hmm
insanity, and again, chosen for her ability to look into a camera and lie with aplomb. I don't know how else to put it. And all of this is to say that they are creating and this started back in the Bush administration, where I remember there was this anonymous source, an anonymous person in the administration said, "We're making our own reality." Kellyanne Conway in the first administration, the first Trump administration, effectively saying the same thing.
Yep.
Um, and we've now gotten to a point where it's just gaslighting. It's
Yep.
just, I mean, the universities with the anti-Semitism is the best example of that. Somebody who to me has been awful to American Jews is talking about weaponizing his office to protect Jews. I mean, that is gaslighting, and that to me is like some, an abusive husband beating his wife and then saying to her, "You deserved it, right? You deserved it. I'm doing this because I love you."
Hmm.
That's
Yep.
the analogy. I'm sorry if it's
And
an offensive analogy to some people, but that it's I'm gonna beat the shit out of you because I love you,
yep. Yep.
and that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing to the American people. And as you so well put it, before we have to wrap up here, there has not been one country that has gone through this whose economy has not collapsed. The closest you could say is that the Chinese government, which is also authoritarian, has an economy that works for people who are helpful to crony capitalism. So
Yep.
if you are close to the ruling communist Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, then you're going to do really well. Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba, got out of line. Well, not so much anymore. And same thing in Russia. You could be exorbitantly wealthy
Oh,
if you want to,
and
play
lose
by
it like this
play by Moscow
overnight,
rules
and lose it overnight. I mean,
and lose it.
how quick
And
Putin
but
made
but
those oligarchs, and very quickly he strips them at his choosing and
but
throws them into jail. So,
but the average person lives like shit in all of
absolutely.
these countries. And that's what's going to happen here. So for people who don't think that this impacts them, look at your 401k, look at the stock market. You may think it doesn't impact you now, it will. More companies, I don't know if people know this, more companies have declared bankruptcy since Trump has been president in this quarter than any year since 2010. What was happening in 2010? The financial crisis. We were just coming out of the financial, we were starting to kind of climb out of the financial crisis. We did not have a financial crisis. We had inflation. We did not have a financial crisis until Trump
And
came along.
inflation was at 2.9%.
Yeah,
I mean, that's another thing, the propaganda. I mean, look, you can't deny that prices went up. They really did. But you had the propaganda in the media really spinning it to a point that when I honestly did not know what inflation was when, the media was creating an inflation crisis. And I saw inflation on social media, and then I look and I'm like 2.9%. Like, is this a joke? I mean, in Turkey, it's like 90%, you
but
know?
that's my point. I mean, so look, he was handed an economy with massive
A
job growth,
healthy economy,
a
very
very healthy
healthy.
economy. Um, Inflation was coming down.
Hmm.
Um, the price of eggs was going up because of the avian flu, which is still not under control. The price of eggs now is a full $2 higher than the day that Joe Biden left office per dozen
And they
on
fired
average.
everyone who
They fired everybody
is
who's gonna,
in
yeah,
charge
they
of the
fired,
avian flu. So
yeah. He just announced that he's putting tariffs on Mexican tomatoes at the height of summer, which is tomato season. So get ready to pay more for everything from your pizza to your salads to your, tomato in your
coffee,
burger,
coffee.
coffee.
I live on
Um,
coffee.
so like this doesn't just stop with owning the libs, and it doesn't just stop. These are not all theoretical things that we're talking about, other than to say again, we just want you to be prepared, not because we're like Cassandra, not because we're paranoid, but because we've studied this, the two of us. I've lived it, Olga's family has lived it. It's here. It's not that it's coming, it's here. And on that note, I have to go to CNN if anybody is not sick of the sound of my voice yet. going to be on with Scott Jennings and a few other people on Abby Phillips' show tonight from 10 to 11. Olga and I will be back at our usual perch at 11 o'clock Eastern on Thursday mornings here on Substack Live. Please join us. Follow Olga on Russia Unmasked and the Trump Tyranny Tracker, her two excellent, excellent, excellent newsletters. If you don't follow her, please do. Follow me at Salty Politics, my newsletter. We are so grateful to you. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of you who joined us tonight. Um, Thank you. And we are so grateful to you. Send us questions, comments, anything, and we will talk about it more on Thursday. Olga, great to see you. Thanks,
Great to
everybody.
see
And we'll
you.
see
Good
you in a
luck
few days.
surviving
Let's
that
all,
hour.
yeah. I wish we had thought about having drinks. I wish I could have a drink right now as we're talking about this, but I gotta try to stay sober for the show. Okay,
Yeah.
bye everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
See ya.
Bye.